Wyoming Territory. 1887. Dust swirled around the wheels of the westbound stagecoach as it rattled into the town of Dry Creek, carrying dreams, regrets, and one too-stiff woman in a deep plum traveling dress. Della Zimmerman clutched her satchel to her chest, her gloves damp with sweat despite the cold spring wind. Her hat, feathered and far too fine for this sun-bleached town, tilted slightly as the coach rolled to a stop in front of the general store. She swallowed hard when she saw the faces waiting, mostly men, a few women and all of them staring. Someone snorted. "Looks like the city sent us a peacock," a woman muttered, loud enough for others to hear. Laughter followed. Della's spine stiffened. She stepped down from the coach, adjusting her skirts with quiet grace. She had survived illness, loss, and too many empty nights in a boarding house room that smelled like old bread. She would survive this too. She stood on the boardwalk searching. The man who had written her Mr. Clarence Hill had said he'd meet her here. Said he needed a wife to help raise his 2 children after his wife passed. Said he wanted someone who knew music, who could bring softness to a house that had gone hollow, but Clarence wasn't there. Instead, a few rough cowhands leaned against a post, whispering and chuckling, their gazes crawling over her like flies. 2 older women gave her a once-over and exchanged a look. One shook her head. "Ignore them," a voice said, low and sure, behind her. She turned. A tall man stood there, hat in hand, the wind tugging at his coat. His hair was the color of wheat left too long in the sun, and his eyes, steady, warm, held no judgment, just something like recognition. "You look like my forever," he said, plain as anything. Della's breath caught. "I beg your pardon, I mean it," he said, not blinking. "Name's Ledger Jameson. I was not expecting to see you here, but I am real glad I did." Do you know Mr. Hill?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ledger's jaw tensed. "I know him. And I know he left town 3 days ago with a saloon girl and no intention of coming back." He tipped his hat lower. "Left his kids with an old neighbor. No letter, no word." Della's knees nearly buckled. She had nothing else. No home back east, no family left. Everything she had was in that small, worn satchel and the coins stitched into the hem of her petticoat. "I do not know what to do," she said softly, her voice trembling. Ledger looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out his hand. "Come with me. You can meet the children. They deserve to know someone came for them." She hesitated. "Why would you help me?" "Because someone should," he said. "And because you look like my forever." She stared at his hand. Then, slowly, she put hers in his. Ledger led her down the street, past the stairs and whispers, to where his horse waited. He helped her into the saddle, then swung up behind her. She was not sure if it was proper, but his presence was steady, his chest strong behind her, and she felt safe. They rode out of town and into the hills, where fences sagged and windmill blades creaked. After half an hour, they reached a small homestead, modest and worn but tidy. 2 children stood outside the house, squinting in the light. "Kids," Ledger called. "Come meet Miss Zimmerman." The boy was maybe 10, the girl younger 7, maybe 8. The boy stepped forward, chin high. "You the one Pa sent for?" Della nodded. "Yes, my name is Della, and your name's?" "I am Kellen," the boy said. "This is my sister, Katie." Katie clung to her brother's hand but eyed Della's dress with open wonder. "You look like the ladies in picture books." Della swallowed hard. "I am here to help if you will have me." Kellen's face stayed guarded. "We do not need help." Ledger crouched beside him. "You do not need to trust her right away, but she came all this way. That means something." Della knelt, letting her skirts pool around her. "I brought music books. Your father said you liked music." Katie's eyes lit up. Kellen frowned, but something in his shoulders loosened. Ledger showed her the house, 2 rooms, a lean-to kitchen, and a loft where the children slept. "You can stay in my sister's old room," he said. "She married a rancher up near Cheyenne last fall." "Ledger," Della said once they were alone in the kitchen, "I will not stay where I am not welcome." "You are welcome," he said quietly. "This place. It could use someone like you." She looked out the window at the children chasing each other near the barn. "They are hurting." "So are you," he said. She turned back to him. "What do you want from me?" He met her eyes. "Just stay, for now, help the kids. Let them see someone kept their promise." Della nodded. "All right." That night, she unpacked her satchel in the small bedroom with the blue quilt and the creaky floorboards. She brushed her hair and changed into a simpler dress. She heard Ledger's voice from the kitchen, reading to the children. She smiled. The next morning, she cooked breakfast. Kellen only picked at the food, but Katie smiled brightly and asked if Della would braid her hair. By evening, Della had played one of the songs from her book on the old pump organ in the corner, and both children had sat and listened, quiet and wide-eyed. Ledger watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a soft look on his face. 3 days passed. Then 5. Della patched shirts, washed dishes, taught Katie to read in the afternoons. Kellen stayed distant, but he no longer glared. He even let her help him with his writing once. One night, while the wind howled outside and the children slept, Della stood on the porch, staring out at the stars. Ledger stepped beside her. "You all right? I should be angry," she said. "I came for a man who left, was laughed at in the street, and now I am here with strangers." He looked at her. "Do we feel like strangers?" She turned to him. "No." He reached for her hand, warm in the chill. "You are not someone to pity, Della. You are someone to build a life with." Tears prickled behind her eyes. "I did not expect this. Neither did I." He brushed her cheek with the back of his fingers. "But I meant what I said. You look like my forever." And for the first time in months, Della believed in the possibility of that word. Forever. The first real thaw came on a Wednesday when the earth smelled more like soil than frost, and the creek behind the barn began to gurgle again. Della rolled up her sleeves and scrubbed at the washboard, her elbows damp with soap suds. The wind tugged at loose strands of her hair and her back ached from the bucket hauling, but she found herself humming under her breath. Ledger stepped out from the barn, brushing hay from his sleeves. He carried a bucket of milk, the top still foamed white and warm. "You hum real low," he said, setting the bucket beside the wash basin. "Thought it was the wind at first." She rinsed a shirt and wrung it out. "Mother used to hum when she was nervous." "I suppose I picked it up." "You nervous now?" "A little," she admitted. "But not in a bad way." He nodded as if that made perfect sense, leaned against the post and watched her work. She didn't mind the quiet between them. It had weight, like a quilt laid over tired shoulders. After a while, he spoke again. "Kellen asked if you'd stay past spring." She stopped wringing, the shirt heavy in her hands. "What did you tell him?" "Said you'd answer that yourself." She laid the shirt on the line, smoothing it with both hands. "I didn't think I'd be useful here, not truly. But I've started to feel rooted." Ledger shifted his weight but didn't approach. "You've changed the feel of the place. Even the chickens follow you around." "I feed them the crusts off Katie's bread," she said, lips curving without meaning to. He smiled back, slow and soft. "Still counts." The next morning, Ledger rode north to check fence lines. Della stayed behind, tending the hearth and helping Katie press flower petals between pages of a worn almanac. Kellen spent most of the day outside, carving strange shapes into wood with his pocket knife. He didn't speak much, but when she brought him a tin cup of water, he said thank you without being asked. That night, after supper, Kellen lingered by the table while Ledger read. Della was mending a hem when the boy cleared his throat. "Ma used to make pies with chokecherries from the far hill," he said, eyes on the floor. "She'd let us pit them, but she always checked for the worms after." Della set her needle down. "Would you show me where those trees are?" He looked up. "You'd come, if you'll have me." He gave a quick nod, then turned and went up the ladder to the loft. Ledger watched her closely. "He doesn't talk about her often." "I didn't press," she said. "You didn't have to." A few days later, they walked out to the far hill, the three of them, while Ledger repaired the barn roof. The chokecherry trees were just beginning to bud, small green points along the branches. Kellen showed her where to step to avoid thistles and where the fox den was hidden. Katie gathered dried grass and tucked it into her pockets. On the way back, Della asked, "Will the fruit be ready by summer?" "Late June," Kellen said. "If the frost doesn't come back, then we'll make pies." He didn't answer, but when they reached the yard, he handed her one of his carvings. It was a bird, rough around the edges but shaped with care. Later that week, Della ventured into town with Ledger. Supplies were low flour, salt, kerosene, and she needed thread for Katie's dress. She wore a calico gown she'd let down at the hem, her hair braided plainly. Still, the stares returned as they walked into the store. "Ledger," a man at the counter said, straightening. "Didn't expect to see you with company." "Della Zimmerman," Ledger said. "She's part of the household now." The man's eyes flicked over her. "That's so." She met his gaze directly, calm and unflinching. "I'm raising 2 children and keeping a kitchen warm." "I'd say that counts." Ledger didn't speak, but his hand hovered near her back as they shopped, close enough to catch her if anything were to tilt. Back at the homestead, they unloaded the wagon together. She handed him the last sack of flour and he paused at the porch step. "I don't much care what anyone in town says," he said, voice low. "I don't think I do either," she replied. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Ledger found her on the porch again. This time she held a blanket around her shoulders, looking out at the moonlit field. He joined her, not asking permission, just standing beside her like he belonged there. After a moment he said, "My father left when I was 12, took the horses and never looked back." She glanced at him, surprised. "I used to think the wrong people always went," he continued. "But not this time." She turned toward him fully, her hand tightening on the blanket. "You stayed. So did you?" He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers brushing her cheek just once. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, his breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. "Then neither am I." And there, under the open Wyoming sky, something shifted, not sudden but sure. A promise without words, spoken in the hush between heartbeats. The lambs arrived in the second week of April, pale and blinking in the dawn mist. Kellen had found the first one curled beside the fence line, shivering on its spindly legs. He carried it to the barn wrapped in his coat, jaw tight, saying nothing. Della didn't ask questions. She just lit the lantern and fetched the burlap sacks, warming milk on the stove while Ledger checked the rest of the flock. By late afternoon, they had 4 lambs tucked into the straw, all breathing steady, their eyes dark and unblinking. Katie named them after flowers. Della stitched 4 small collars from scrap muslin and let the children paint them with bluing powder. The barn smelled of hay and wool, and something softer hope, maybe. That evening, Ledger lingered in the kitchen after the dishes were done. He leaned on the windowsill, watching the wind ripple through the grass, his brow pulled low. "Something's pressing on you," Della said, folding a towel over the back of a chair. "There's a buyer coming in from Laramie next week. Wants salt pork and lamb meat. I can't meet the order and keep enough for us through winter." He didn't turn when he spoke, just kept his eyes on the field. "I could cull the older ewes, or I could send the buyer away and take the loss." "You've done both before," she said. He looked at her then, eyes worn thin. "I've never had to think about more than myself and the kids." "You still don't," she said gently. "We're not a burden, we're a household." He drew in a slow breath. "I know that, just trying to think right with it." "Then let me help think," Ledger nodded once. "I'll talk with Kellen in the morning. He's old enough to understand choices now." The next day, they walked the pasture together, Della holding the Ledger book while Ledger counted heads. The spring sun warmed the backs of her shoulders, and the wind smelled of wet earth and last year's grass. She listened as he worked, careful not to speak unless he asked something he liked, quiet while he thought. When they returned to the house, Kellen was waiting on the porch with a wooden crate full of eggs. He gave his father a long look. "You're gonna sell the older ones?" he asked. Ledger stepped up beside him. "I'm thinking on it." Kellen set the crate down. "We can do without biscuits for a while, just don't sell Clover." Della glanced toward the barn. "Which one is Clover?" "The one with the torn ear." "Mama liked her best." Ledger's shoulders shifted like something settled across them. "All right, Clover stays." Later that night, Della sat by the fire mending a waistband on Katie's Sunday dress. Ledger came in from the porch, brushing dirt from his boots. "You're quiet tonight," she said, not looking up. He eased into the chair across from her. "I saw you out with the children this morning. You had them giggling by the fence. They were making up songs about the chickens. You let them be children. Even when things are lean." She tied off the thread and laid the needle aside. "I've known the difference between a house and a home. I prefer the latter." Ledger leaned back, his hand resting on the arm of the chair. "You ever think about staying past summer?" She met his eyes. "I stopped counting days." They sat without speaking for a while. The fire popped. A breeze found its way under the door and stirred the hem of her skirt. Then Ledger said, "I had a dream last night. You were planting wildflowers along the fence line. Said you wanted color near the house." Della smiled just a little. "I did bring seeds from a packet I kept in my coat lining." He raised a brow. "You planned for things." "I planned to marry a man who left town before I arrived. And I've ended up with 3 hearts to tend and a kitchen that finally smells like bread again. I'll keep planning." Ledger stood and crossed to her, his boots soft against the rug. He didn't reach for her, just stood near, waiting. "I'm not a poet," he said. "But I know what it feels like to have something settle in your chest and stay." Her pulse stirred. "I don't need poetry." He knelt beside her, his hand resting on the edge of her chair, close but not touching. "Then I'll give you something better." She tilted her head. "What's that?" "A life. If you'll build it with me." She didn't answer right away. She set the mended dress aside, folded her hands in her lap. Then she reached out and laid her fingers over his. "I've already started," she said, his breath caught barely. Then he turned his hand over and laced their fingers together. Nothing rushed, nothing loud. Just the quiet certainty of 2 people who had lost and kept going and found, at last, the thing that stayed. By early May, the frost had loosened its grip entirely. The ground around the house turned soft and dark, ready for seed. Della stood at the edge of the back garden with her sleeves rolled and her boots sunk into the thawed earth. Ledger had already tilled the soil, and now she worked beside Katie, pressing seeds into careful rows: beans, carrots, turnips. The girl was quiet, focused, her small fingers brushing dirt over each planted line like she was tucking in sleeping things. Ledger passed through only once that morning, carrying timber toward the shed. His hand brushed the top of Della's shoulder as he stepped behind her. No words, just touch. It settled something in her chest. Later, while Katie napped and Kellen fetched water from the creek, Della sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper and a bottle of ink. She'd begun writing to a widow she'd once known from the boarding house, a kind woman with a bad hip and too many stories. Della didn't mention Ledger directly, but her words were steadier than they had been in months. She wrote about the children, about learning the rhythm of the land. She paused before signing her name, then added a leaf of pressed yarrow between the pages. That night, Ledger fetched a small box from under the bed and set it on the table without a word. Della looked at it, then at him. "You can open it," he said. Inside lay a pair of scissors, worn-handled and sharp, nestled beside folded oilcloth and a small bundle of dyed thread. A wooden darning egg rested beneath. "My mother's," he said. "She kept them for mending and small dress work. I thought you might want them." Della ran her finger along the scissors' edge. "You're sure?" "She'd have liked you," he said, quiet but sure. She closed the box gently. "I'll use them with care." The next morning, she let the children sleep in while she walked the property line alone. The air was still, the sky low with the weight of a coming rain. At the west fence, she stopped and leaned her elbows on the top rail, gazing at the hills that rolled into mist. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "I'm not afraid of staying." Ledger found her on the porch that evening, wiping mud from her boots. He handed her a folded square of cloth stitched tight around something heavy. "What's this?" she asked. "I built a frame for your music pages," he said. "So they won't curl near the stove." She unfolded the cloth slowly, revealing a narrow wooden rack with a carved lip and 2 pegs on the back. "I saw how you kept pressing them flat," he added. "Seemed wrong, them warping like that." She ran her thumb over the smooth edge. "You made this?" Used scrap pine, it's not perfect, but it'll hold. She looked up. You pay attention in quiet ways. Ledger's gaze held hers. So do you? A soft sound came from the loft window, Katie's voice singing something low and tuneless while Kellen shuffled through a drawer, likely searching for the slate board. Della smiled toward the sound. Ledger didn't move. You ever think about what you want for the rest of your days? He asked, his voice steady but low. I used to think it was a house with a piano and someone to sit beside me while I played, she said. That's changed. How so? I'd rather have a porch with you on it and children laughing from the loft. I'd trade the piano for a fire that stays lit when the wind howls. Ledger didn't answer right away. He reached up and took her hand, brushing his thumb along the base of her fingers. I've got no ring, he said. But I've got land and 2 children who have started sleeping through the night again, and I've got you if you'll keep choosing this. I already have, she said. He leaned forward then, not in haste, but with the weight of every quiet moment they'd built together. When he kissed her, it was warm and certain, the kind of kiss that doesn't ask permission because the answer's already been lived. Inside, the children's voices rose and fell with laughter. The sky darkened above them, low with promise. And Della, still holding Ledger's hand, breathed deep and knew without doubt that she had arrived exactly where she was meant to be. The last of the spring rains passed through in a hush, leaving the yard glittering beneath a pale sunrise. Steam lifted off wet fence rails and the air smelled of pine and soaked soil. Della stood at the pump, filling a tin basin with water, her skirts damp at the hem from the walk through the grass. She looked over her shoulder toward the house, watching the smoke curl steady from the chimney. Inside, the children were finishing their porridge, the morning quiet broken only by the scrape of spoons and Katie's soft humming as she traced patterns in the steam on the windowpane. Kellen had grown taller in the past month, his sleeves now hung short at the wrists, and he'd started rising before the rooster, checking the barn and splitting kindling without being asked. Ledger stepped out of the shed with a rolled length of canvas under his arm. He walked with purpose, eyes scanning the sky as he moved toward her. Fence on the east slopes leaning in 2 spots, he said. Likely from the runoff. She handed him the basin. I can bring nails and a hammer out after breakfast. He shifted the canvas to his other arm. You've done more than your share already. You didn't ask me to come here and sit idle. He studied her for a moment, gaze lingering. No, I didn't. By midday, they stood side by side at the edge of the east pasture, working in rhythm. Della held the fence post steady while Ledger drove it deeper with the post maul. Sweat darkened the back of his collar and his shirt clung to his shoulders, but he didn't slow. She handed him nails as he worked, and when the last board was secured, he wiped his brow and looked out across the hills. Place is holding together better this year, he said. Feels different. She brushed dirt from her hands. Because it is. He watched her quietly. I was thinking of building onto the house, just a lean-to at first. Room enough for shelves, maybe a writing desk. For who? She asked, unsure if he meant himself or the children. For you, he said. She looked at him. I wouldn't know what to do with a writing desk. You'd figure it out. His tone was gentle but certain. They walked back in silence, the kind that didn't press. When they reached the porch, Katie was waiting with a bundle of wild sage cradled in her arms. I found it near the creek, she said. It smells like Mama's old scarf. Della knelt and took the bundle carefully. Thank you, love. We'll hang it in the kitchen. Kellen leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. I saw a wagon in town yesterday. It had bolts of calico and a man with a box of spectacles. Ledger raised an eyebrow. You go to town without telling me? I went with Mr. Hill's old neighbor. She needed help carrying flour. Della looked to Ledger, but he only nodded slowly. Next time, leave word. Kellen's posture eased. I didn't mean to worry you. You didn't, Della said. But we look out for each other now. That evening, Della sat at the kitchen table with the sage tied to a beam above her head. She stitched a new hem into Kellen's shirt by lantern light, the steady rhythm of the needle calming her nerves. Ledger entered carrying a box she hadn't seen before. He set it down beside her and opened the lid. Inside was a pair of boots her size, made from soft brown leather, neatly stitched but clearly worn. "They were my sister's," he said. "She left them behind when she married. I had them cleaned up." Della ran her hand over the top boot, thumb grazing the seam. "They fit. We measured your old pair while you were out with Katie." She looked up. "You always notice everything, only the things that matter." That night, as the children settled in the loft, Ledger joined her on the porch. The wind had calmed and the moon lit the field in silver. He held something in his hand wrapped in muslin. When he opened it, she saw a ring, simple, gold with no stone. The band was slightly worn but whole. "My mother wore it until the day she passed," he said. "She gave it to my sister, and my sister gave it to me when she left for Cheyenne, said I'd know when to use it." Della didn't speak. She watched him kneel, his hand steady. "I can't promise wealth or calm years, but I can promise steadiness and care, and a place beside me for however long the Lord allows." She felt her throat swell, but her voice held. "Yes." He rose and slipped the ring onto her finger. It slid into place like it had been waiting. They didn't kiss right away. They just stood there, hands clasped, the weight of the moment settling around them like the hush before dawn. The wedding came a week later beneath the cottonwood near the creek. The preacher rode in from Laramie, and the neighbor woman brought cornbread and pickled beets. Katie wore a crown of woven grass. Kellen stood up straight and handed Ledger the ring with both hands. They said their vows in low voices, eyes locked, and when Ledger kissed her, it was slow and unhurried, like a man who knew what he was holding. Kellen built a swing for Katie and hung it from the porch beam. Della planted wild sage in the garden. Ledger started the lean-to, and by the time the wheatgrass turned gold in late summer, the writing desk was in place, the shelves filling with books and folded cloth. Years later, people in town still asked about the woman who'd arrived on the stagecoach with nothing but a satchel and a straight spine. And Ledger would smile not wide but true and say, "She made this house into something that holds." And every morning, Della would rise before the sun, wrap her shawl around her shoulders, and step onto the porch to find Ledger waiting with coffee in one hand and his other held out for hers. And she would take it, every time,